Good morning, lovely people. I'm in the garden this morning. I have transplanted out all the vegetables and flowers that I've grown from seed. I've also direct sowed some things. And I wanted to talk to you guys today about spacing and companion planting. Two questions I get asked a whole lot. So I'm going to take you around my garden and talk to you about what I do and what my recommendations are for you. And I'm starting today right here with the zucchini bed. I have 8-foot by 4-foot beds. I have 6 of them. So probably unlike a lot of you, I have quite a bit of space and I can be very generous with how I plant things. But the principles remain the same no matter what kind of space that you have to work with. So there are two main things to consider when you're spacing out your plants. One is competition for resources. Are your plants spaced so tightly that they're going to compete for nutrients in the soil, for sunlight, all of that? And the other thing is airflow. And that's a really big deal if you live in a climate with humidity. I am here in zone 7, right on the border between Pennsylvania and Delaware, and we get really hot, sticky, steamy summers. And so airflow is a big deal, especially when you're talking about a squash plant, which can succumb to powdery mildew so easily. So if you're packing your squash in too tightly, the airflow can't get in there, the moisture will stay on those leaves, and mildew will develop. So with these 8 by 4 foot beds, I would recommend 2 plants maximum in the 4-foot width. As you can see, I have done 1, 2, 3 and spaced mine out a lot. And that's because these things get so big. People see their zucchini plants looking like this and they kind of think that they're always going to stay sort of manageable like this, but these guys start to trail out. And if you're treating your plants well, they're going to last for a few months and just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I have given this one space to grow this way, this one space to grow that way, and that one space to grow that way. So the tightest I'd recommend going with zucchini is 6 to a bed. So 2 on the short side and 3 on the long side. I know a lot of people will recommend the diamond pattern where you're doing 4 in a square and 1 in the middle. With zucchini, that's just impossible. They get so big. Those leaves will be like this big, and they'll just crowd each other out. They'll compete for resources. It's just not going to keep your zucchini lasting as long as they could. One thing to consider with a tighter spacing, you want to keep pruning those leaves. I have a zucchini tips video. Go back and look at that. I talk about all the pests and pest control. On that note, I have planted, the only other thing in this bed is amaranth. Now, amaranth can serve as a trap plant. What does that mean? That means a plant that lures pests from your main crop, and it's a sort of sacrificial plant. So amaranth, the squash bugs like, so I'm hoping that it will outpace the squash plants, get a little bit bigger. I grew it about from seed about a week before my squash, and I'm hoping that it will draw the squash bugs. I will do a video later in the season and let you know how that goes. Let's talk about cucumbers and tomatoes this way. Okay, so last year I planted my cucumbers on these flat panels and they did great. This year I'm doing cherry tomatoes and you'll see I have 1, 2, about 1.5 foot apart, which is what kind of spacing I did for the 2 cucumbers that were here. This year I'm doing my cucumbers on my big arched trellis over here, just giving them that much more space because cucumbers will grab onto anything that they can, including other plants that are nearby. So when I planted my cucumbers on those flat panels last year, I had tomatoes growing alongside. Tomatoes get big and cucumbers will grab them. Whatever you do, whatever kind of space you have, use a trellis, grow those cucumbers up, and if you can give them space, give them space. Now, I'll tell you quickly what I have in this bed before I take you over to my tomato bed. I have the 2 cucumbers, which are about 2 feet apart because I have the luxury of that space. I've got 2 eggplant that is also about 2 feet apart, but I would say 1 foot apart is fine. I have some flowers here, some zinnia, which are going to attract pollinators. I have more amaranth, that's the red plant that is serving as that same trap plant for squash. Remember, cucumbers are in that squash family. And then towards the back, I have those cherry tomatoes, which, like I said, I am growing up this trellis this year. I've never trellised cherry tomatoes before, but you can do that. Tomatoes, I don't know if you guys realize this, but tomatoes would be very happy to trail along the ground. They would, in fact, if you let them trail, they would drop roots down along their stems. They are wild plants. So I'm going to use that to my advantage, especially with cherry tomatoes. I am going to start, as they grow up, I'm going to start fastening them to this and spreading them out that way. I'll talk to you about tomato cages in a second when I get over there. I have a problem with them. I have some alternate ideas for you. But as you can see, there is a real mix here. Tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant, flowers. I believe in diversity in your bed. If you can mix things together, it sort of helps with the pest pressure because it won't be a monoculture, right? Certain crops will attract certain beneficial bugs and certain pests, and others will be different, and they can support each other in that way. Honestly, guys, there really aren't any vegetables that can't be planted with other vegetables. A little bit of that is old wives' tales. You shouldn't plant this next to that. As long as you're giving them space, as long as they're not too tightly packed together that they're competing for resources, you will be just fine. There are certain benefits that you can take advantage of, and I will show you right now over in my tomato bed what that could look like. Come with me. So here I have 4 tomatoes in a row. I've got 4 more on that side. They are spaced about a foot apart. I do a technique called the Florida weave, and you can go back and look at my tomato episode from last year. I teach you how to create the Florida weave, which is basically 2 poles and some string that guides these tomatoes up. Now, these tomatoes are indeterminate, which means that they can grow like 8 feet tall. So the Florida weave works for me because all I do is add more layers of string to support these growing tomatoes. If you have determinate tomatoes, then tomato cages will work just fine for you. I have a pet peeve with them. I find that they sort of confine the plant and don't make pruning very easy. And pruning is really important. Again, go back and watch my tomato episode. I teach you all about that. But basically, 1 foot apart works just fine to create airflow in between these tomatoes. I have a few basil plants growing here, which are natural bedfellows with tomatoes. Really, any herb will help deter pests because of their essential oils. But basil doesn't like to be very hot, so it will appreciate the shade from the tomatoes. It will keep them from bolting. Now, down the middle, I have a whole row of carrots, and on that side, I have a whole row of spring onion. What are they doing in this bed? Well, spring onion and carrots are really great companions because the pests that attack carrots do not like the smell of onions. Now, carrots and onions in my tomato bed works because carrots like shade, and these tomato plants will be huge and they will provide the cool shade that carrots deserve. And the carrots will help aerate the soil. That helps the tomato roots push out and access the nutrients that they need. The spring onion will be harvested before my tomatoes will be harvested, so it all works together. The marigolds are great for attracting pollinators. I have heard that they deter rabbits and squirrels. I haven't seen that in my opinion. Maybe if I planted them all around my garden like a fence, that might happen. But a little bit here and there isn't going to do too much. Let me talk to you very quickly about square foot gardening, which is a method of high density planting. So if you have only one 8x4 foot bed, you can map out 1 foot squares and plant your plants in those 1 foot squares. Let me caution you with this. This is a bigger method of gardening than just spacing. When you are planting with that kind of high density, you have to consider about the composition of your soil. You have to stay on top of pruning. There are techniques that go with that kind of growing. It's not just a matter of plunking in your plants and hoping for the best. They will be competing in a very intense way when you're doing this very close 1 foot planting. So please do your homework, do your research. I've not ever planted this way because I have the luxury of space, but I don't want you to do that and fail. I don't want you to get discouraged. So please do your homework if you're going to consider planting in that way. The only place in my garden where I really do a high density planting is over in my lettuce bed. So let me bring you over there now. So this is my cut and come again lettuce bed. So instead of planting my lettuces with spaces in between each plant, I just carved out trenches, sprinkled in the seeds, potted them down, and didn't thin them out at all. So this is a very high density way of growing lettuce, and basically I'm going to be harvesting them like baby greens. So when they're just a little bit taller, I'm going to start trimming them down and they will replenish themselves. I will get at least a couple of months of lettuce before it all wants to bolt. This year I'm going to try some shade cloth to prevent them from bolting and see how far I can push my lettuces. I have 6 different kinds growing here. I made an heirloom lettuce video last year where you can see some of my favorite varieties, which I'm growing again this year. And I also have a video, I'll link all of these at the end, about how to grow, how to plant the seed in this cut and come again style. One of the advantages to high density like this is that when these grow really tall and fill out, they will cover the exposed dirt in this bed. So I won't have to worry about mulching this bed. Whereas something like my zucchini plants, because they're planted so far apart, I will put down some kind of crushed up leaves, some pine needles to cover the tops of the bed to suppress the weeds and to keep the moisture locked in the soil rather than evaporating in the hot sun. Eventually, when those zucchini grow really big, they're going to shade the bed and there won't be a problem. But that's something to keep in mind when you are spacing out your plants. High density, you don't have to worry about mulches too much. But then you have the competition and the problem with airflow. So I hope you learned something from this video. Longtime viewers of this channel will know that I love taking deep dives into the origins of our food, learning about what it takes to get it to your table. And that's why I partnered with the sponsor of this video, Skillshare.
Now, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but I also edit all the videos on this channel myself. That includes all those epic episodes in our flagship series, How Does It Grow? So if you've seen chickpeas, tomatoes, olive oil, Amalfi lemons, that's me, the woman behind the curtain and in front. And I did it by teaching myself Premiere Pro all those years ago. I would have killed to have had Halise Narvaez guiding me through the basics with her Skillshare class. But luckily, you do. Her class is called Learn Premiere Pro and Edit a How-To Video for Beginners. Halise is such a likable teacher. She explains things super clearly and with her signature charm. She covers the entire process of editing a professional-looking video, including basic color grading and audio mixing. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creators, from cooking to gardening, photography to yoga. It's completely ad-free. Most of the classes are under 60 minutes, so you can focus on what you really need to know and then get busy applying those skills in the real world. A yearly subscription is less than $10 a month, and the first 1,000 of you, my lovely subscribers, who click the link in the description below will get a free trial of premium membership, so you can explore your creativity.
But there's also lots more learning to be had right here. I'm going to be back in the garden showing you how to make my welded wire trellises, the arched one, the flat panels. I'm also going to be doing a video on raised beds. I used to have wood beds in this garden. you might have noticed I have something else. So I'll take you through the pros and cons of all the different kinds of materials. So much more gardening content coming at you really soon. Thanks, guys.